My name is Noelle, and I'm a 40-year-old housewife. Today, I want to share a bit about my family. I have a husband who is my age and a daughter who recently turned 16. I met my husband back in college, and we fell in love and got married. Our relationship seemed ordinary enough, but there was a significant difference between us. While I have a more rough around the edges personality, he is exceptionally meticulous. He has a peculiar obsession with organization and wouldn't rest until everything was precisely in its place. I sensed this about him even while we were dating, but I hoped that marriage might bring some positive change. Unfortunately, things didn't improve. After we married, his need for order only intensified. I found myself constantly adjusting my life to fit his rigid standards. Despite my best efforts to be accommodating, there were aspects of his behavior that I simply couldn't accept. Our disagreements often escalated into heated arguments. Each day felt like a blur of stress with no respite in sight. When our daughter was born 2 years into our marriage, I hoped she might bring some tranquility to our lives. My husband was thrilled to have a daughter, but his joy was short-lived. He struggled with the disruption to his routine that a new baby inevitably brings. When our daughter cried at night, his frustration would turn into harsh words. He made it clear that he had no intention of participating in raising her. I can't count how many times I've considered leaving him because of his selfish behavior. But for our daughter's sake, I've endured. I fought fiercely to protect her, even at great personal cost. And just when I thought I had faced the worst, another crisis emerged, one that seemed to mock all my efforts to safeguard my child. It's often said that children take after their fathers, but I desperately hoped my precious daughter wouldn't resemble that man. Thankfully, her facial expressions were more like mine, and I thought everything would be all right. However, as she grew older, it became clear that she was developing traits similar to my husband's. Around the age of 10, she began criticizing my cooking and would get upset or throw tantrums if things weren't arranged or clean to her liking. Recently, as she entered her rebellious phase, her harsh words towards me have become more frequent. I'm always give in to her demands and often argue back, but this only seemed to drive a wedge between us. To my dismay, my husband sided with her, placing the blame on me. Facing criticism from both of them, I felt powerless. My life became a constant barrage of complaints. Then, one fateful day, things took a turn for the worse. I woke up feeling drained and unwell, with a slight fever and dizziness that made it hard to walk. I was so weak that I could only sit on a chair, unable to stand. Despite my condition, neither my husband nor my daughter offered a kind word. Instead, my husband demanded to know where his red tie was, the one he hadn't worn in 2 months, and questioned if I had washed his socks. My daughter, too, was focused on her own needs, asking where her things were. It seemed as though they were oblivious to my state. It was just a tie and some socks. Why make such a fuss over trivial matters? Couldn't they spare a moment to show concern for me? Somehow, I managed to see them off and then collapse in the hallway. When I regained consciousness, I found myself on the couch in the living room. I must have moved there unconsciously while I was out. Although I was still tired, the rest had improved my condition. I felt surprisingly refreshed, as if part of my mind was still in a restful state. Reluctant to leave this rare comfort, I decided to go back to sleep. When I awoke next, it was already dark outside. Seeing the time on the clock, past 5 in the evening, caused a rush of panic. I hadn't done most of the household chores, including the laundry and dinner preparation. I had to make dinner, so I jumped up and rushed to the kitchen. With no time to go shopping, I quickly assembled a meal from leftovers. "I'm home," my daughter announced as she walked in right when I was still frantically trying to finish dinner. "Wait, you're still cooking. That's so annoying," she commented dismissively. "I'm sorry, it'll be ready soon," I replied, but she ignored my apology and went straight to her room. Not long after, my husband came home from work. "What? You're still making dinner?" His tone was filled with irritation. He's a creature of habit and had clearly noticed that something was off. Without another word, he retreated to his room. He emerged 15 minutes later, which was just enough time for him to change clothes before eating, as per his routine. I had only 15 minutes left. I cooked with frantic speed, trying to salvage the meal despite rough chopping and questionable seasoning. I had to finish before he came out, or I dreaded to think what might happen. I managed to get everything plated just as my husband emerged from his room. I felt a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. "What is this? Who could possibly eat this?" he exclaimed in disgust. "What's wrong? What do you mean?" I asked, bewildered by his outburst. This stir fry, it's overcooked, the color is all wrong, and the vegetables aren't even cut properly. I'm sorry, I was in a bit of a rush today. Rush? You're not working. You have plenty of time, he snapped. That one sentence, implying that I had no real responsibilities, cut deeper than I expected. Why do I have to endure this from a husband who doesn't even notice my struggle? I don't have time to spare, and you act like I'm doing nothing at all. Before I knew it, I was screaming at the top of my lungs. Do you have any idea how much I struggle every day? The outburst took my husband by surprise. I watched as he stepped back, his face showing a mix of fear and confusion. What struggle? House chores can be done at your own pace. Isn't it easy? What do you know about it? I can't just do things at my own pace. I shot back, my frustration boiling over. I couldn't hold back anymore. I was feeling really sick today. I pushed myself to make dinner, and you didn't even try it. How do you think that makes me feel? Tears began to stream down my face as the pent-up emotions finally erupted. My husband's face went pale, and I noticed him taking a step back, overwhelmed by my outbursts. I struggled to catch my breath, feeling dizzy from the intensity of my shouting. I was waiting, hoping for some acknowledgement or, at the very least, an apology. A single "I'm sorry" would have sufficed. Don't mess with me. That small glimmer of hope was extinguished by his trembling, defensive words. Do you even understand how hard I work to support our family? So you're saying I'm just lounging around and living easy? I retorted. I'm saying your job is to support me so I can focus on my work. That's just an excuse. I'm not your servant. Don't talk back to me. I could sense that my husband was on the verge of raising his hand, but I couldn't back down now. As I braced myself for the next round of confrontation, our daughter burst out of her room. What on earth are you two doing? Your voices can be heard outside. This is so embarrassing. Don't stop me. She's the one being unreasonable. And that's exactly the problem. You're being selfish. Just be quiet. My daughter's intervention brought our argument to a halt. I tried to explain the situation to her, and after hearing both sides, she turned to me and said, "Honestly, Mom, you're the one who's wrong." Her words cut through me like a knife. Why? I asked, stunned. Because housework is your responsibility, right? Dad can't afford to take time off work, even when he's unwell. That's right, you're too lenient with yourself. My husband's expression as he echoed my daughter's sentiments filled me with a deep sense of betrayal. Mom is always behind on her chores. Even today, you haven't done the laundry. Exactly, and you're inefficient. You can't even fold the laundry properly. Their words shattered me, leaving me feeling utterly defeated. So you're both saying I'm not trying hard enough? I asked, my voice trembling with hurt. Maybe you're not putting in enough effort. I could probably do it better and faster, my daughter said, her words seeming more than I anticipated. Yeah, you're too laid back. We could probably manage without you, Mom, she added, and those words cut deeper than any physical pain. Was I truly so expendable? I had thought we were a family, but could they dismiss me so easily? Confronted with this harsh reality, I felt a surge of anger and despair. Without thinking, I fled the house. I found myself in a pitch-dark park with no streetlights, my feet itching from running barefoot. I sank onto a park bench, realizing with a shock that I had left the house without even putting on shoes. My tears had dried, and my mind was numb. How long had I been sitting there? Even as I tried to quiet my thoughts, the sting of their harsh words lingered and my heart remained wounded. As I replayed the words from my husband and daughter in my mind, my broken heart began to fill with resentment. I will never forgive them. They, my family, who trampled on my feelings, must face consequences, I vowed silently to myself. Fueled by this resolve, I spent the next morning completing the cleaning and laundry with meticulous care. For breakfast, I prepared a spread as extravagant as a meal at a top restaurant. By the time I finished, my husband and daughter arrived in the living room almost simultaneously. Without meeting my gaze, they both took their seats at the table. Come on, let's have breakfast, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Their faces tightened in response. Mom, what's going on? My daughter asked, her tone reflecting confusion. Today's breakfast is really fancy, she continued. Isn't it your 16th birthday today? Did you forget? My daughter asked, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. Yeah, I did forget, I admitted, feeling a pang of guilt. You'd think your father would remember at least. Yeah, I guess, he replied awkwardly. Their conversation was stiff and uncomfortable. They began eating in silence, clearly observing my every move. It was evident they were either unaware of the hurt they had caused or reluctant to acknowledge it. It was understandable with my husband. After all, he was practically a stranger now. But my daughter, she was the one I had given birth to and raised. I had hoped she would grow up to be more understanding and kind. It's often said that daughters resemble their fathers, but she should have been able to grasp the situation with better upbringing. Regret swirled within me, but it felt irrelevant now. "Listen," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Their heads snapped up and their expressions shifted to alarm. "What? What's going on?" My husband's voice trembled as he asked. "Starting today, I'm leaving this house." Both of their faces went pale simultaneously. "Hold on, why?" they both asked in unison, their voices filled with confusion and panic. "You said you could handle the housework better than me," I said firmly. "I didn't say anything like that," my daughter protested weakly. "Yes, you did. I remember clearly. I've never cut off my daughter's words so sharply before." Whether she was rattled by my tone or not, she didn't argue further. Now, it was my husband's turn to react. "You also said that I have more free time because I'm at home," I continued, my voice steady but resolute. "I didn't mean it like that," he protested weakly. "It's just an excuse. You don't understand what it's like to work in the real world," I said, watching him fall silent. "Don't misunderstand. I'm moving to another house starting today, but that doesn't mean I won't come by here." "Stop. It's my birthday today, right? You're going to celebrate with me, aren't you?" my daughter pleaded, her face contorted with distress. I looked at her tearful expression and couldn't help but let out a small, sad laugh. "I'm sorry. I'm serious about this." Seeing my daughter collapse in despair, I quietly stood up and said, "Well, I'm off." I walked out of the house, leaving behind the sounds of my husband and daughter's desperate cries. That day, I checked into a hotel close by and began renting a small apartment on a monthly basis. I started buying the essentials for my new place. Even amidst my busy schedule, my phone was inundated with messages from both of them. My daughter's apologies came through in a flood of texts and calls every few minutes. As for my husband, he still refuses to admit any fault. His messages were filled with accusations like, "What you did was outrageous." I've left all their messages on read, unable to find it in myself to respond. These days, it's remarkably easy to make a point without saying a word. 2 nights after leaving, I returned to the house. As soon as I opened the front door, my daughter rushed toward me with surprising speed. "Mom, you came back," she exclaimed, her arms wrapping around me in a desperate embrace. "I just came back to pick up something I forgot," I said, gently loosening her hold and heading into the living room. Although I had only been gone for 2 days, the living room remained unchanged. However, the kitchen was another story. It was piled high with convenience store lunchboxes, ramen cups, and empty bottles. The state of the bathroom was even worse. Laundry had been left unwashed and scattered about. Both my husband and daughter frequently criticize my cooking and folding skills, yet neither of them can handle basic household chores like cooking or laundry. Knowing their inability, I had anticipated the mess and wasn't surprised by the state of the house. My husband was in the living room, but his pride kept him from acknowledging me. He turned his face away after a brief glance. I pried myself away from my sobbing daughter and quietly left the house. A week later, when I returned to check on them again, the house was even more chaotic. The accumulated garbage was overwhelming. My daughter's face, emerging from the mess, was grimy and her hair was unkempt. She should be able to manage basic hygiene on her own, but it was evident that their situation was deteriorating rapidly. At this point, my husband finally admitted his fault. "I was wrong. I'm really sorry," he said, kneeling amidst the trash and rubbing his forehead against the floor. Seeing him like that, I said gently, "Don't think that prostrating yourself will make everything right." For the first time, the air seemed to freeze. My husband's face, eyes wide with despair, and my daughter, breaking down in tears beside him, made the moment feel heavy. "If you truly feel sorry, the first thing you need to do is clean up this house. If you can't manage that, I'll proceed with the divorce." I understand. Please forgive me," he pleaded, jumping up and beginning to shuffle the trash around. His unfamiliarity with cleaning made the task more chaotic, but I took over and guided them through the process. It took 3 days to get everything cleaned up perfectly. Now, shall we continue with the birthday party? I asked cheerfully, surveying the living room, which was now cleaner than before, with my husband and daughter lying on the floor. From then on, all the housework fell to my husband, and even my daughter, who had previously sided with him, now supported me. Those days were incredibly hard and painful, but looking back, I realized they were necessary for change.